Hello everyone and welcome to a special episode of Slash Film Daily. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com, and today we're going to present an interview with Bart Layton, the writer-director of a new heist film called American Animals. I saw this movie at Sundance earlier this year. I'll link to my review in the show notes, but just to provide some context for those who don't know, the film is based on the true story of an audacious art heist. It features actors like Evan Peters, Barry Keoghan, and Blake Jenner playing the young thieves, but what makes this movie really interesting is that it also includes interviews with the real thieves as well. Bart Layton made a documentary called The Imposter in 2012, and American Animals is his first traditional narrative feature. One more quick note before we begin. I spoke with Layton on the phone for this interview, and while I was in my apartment in Los Angeles, he was walking around in San Francisco, so occasionally you'll hear some street cars and things like that going by in the background. Overall, though, the audio quality is pretty good. So with that, enjoy my conversation with American Animals writer-director Bart Layton. So intercutting the interviews of the real guys with the action seems like sort of a natural next step for you as a filmmaker. Can you talk about bridging that gap between documentary and the more traditional narrative filmmaking?
Sure, yeah. I hadn't necessarily intended that would be sort of the approach. I suppose after The Imposter, I felt like, I got offered a lot of sort of movies. You guys call them narratives. I mean, I would argue that probably most documentaries, unless they're completely without story or structure, are a narrative as well. But you know what I mean? I couldn't quite get my head around this idea that they might. I suppose I was sort of. I had this itch to scratch, and that was sort of this idea that there might be a new way to tell a true story that hadn't quite been done before. And when I came across this story, which was, to begin with, it felt like it was a fun story, and I was sort of intrigued enough by the fact that it was a crime committed by a group of young men who really shouldn't be caught within a million miles of a crime scene, if you know what I mean. So that was intriguing. And then there was something about the letters so I started exchanging letters with them, and at that point they were kind of a long way into a prison sentence. And I guess it was the letters they sent which felt to me like it was more than just a fun yarn about a robbery, that actually there might be something more interesting about this idea of these rather lost young men who were in search of an identity and were in search of finding some meaning in their lives or some purpose, and doing so through very ill-advised means.
Right.
Because I suppose their honesty about the motivations for what they'd done, particularly Spencer, who's the Barry Keoghan character. He wrote to me in his letters about dreaming of becoming an artist and feeling that the one thing that was going to prevent him from becoming an artist of any great value was the fact that he never had any life experience worth a damn, in his mind anyway. And so that idea, of having a central character whose main problem is that he doesn't have a problem, felt like a brilliant starting point. And because I suppose I slightly, despite what they'd done, I kind of fell in love with that honesty. I thought, is there a way to include them in the film in a way that it definitely isn't in any shape or form a documentary, but it also isn't just that kind of classic thing that we've all seen a million times, which is, you see that caption based on a true story at the front, and then, at the end you see a bunch of photographs of the real people.
Right.
Which, it feels like such a cop-out because, and the other thing was, it's such a good story that it didn't need kind of much sort of Hollywood embellishment. you could, there are lots of different ways of telling it. You could have told the FBI story, it could have had a more catch me if you can type structure. But for me, it was all about these guys crossing a line they should never have crossed. And because also, it's sort of a movie about these young guys falling in love with a movie fantasy, or, almost trying to live inside a movie rather than their own reality.
Right. Yeah.
Felt like it presented an opportunity to have a form which reflected that idea of falling into a movie, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I actually watched Becoming Alexander in preparation for our discussion today, and there's a moment in that when Oliver Stone talks about how Alexander the Great was probably filled with ideas about his destiny from a very young age, and that's an idea that sort of pops up in American Animals too. What is it about the concept of entitlement that...
I cannot believe you watched that. Where the fuck did you find that?
I found it on YouTube.
Oh my god, that was something that I had to rescue. God almighty, I have no idea that was sort of in the...
Well, yeah, I've seen The Imposter, and I wanted to go back and just check out some of the other work he did to see if there were any sort of connecting themes that I could find.
Wow.
And one of the things that I noticed was that this concept of entitlement and destiny and all that sort of popped up in that Becoming Alexander special. So I was just wondering if there was what is it about the concept of entitlement that sort of interests you as a storyteller?
I think, leaving the Becoming Alexander thing aside, because I'm not entirely to blame for that. That was a sort of rescue job as a favour. But I'm really, really impressed that you dug it out. My God. Well, I think, I think there's something. I tell you what it is that I think interests me. Is that idea that we, without getting too kind of, what's the word, intellectual or wanky, as we might say in the UK, there's something about, there's a whole theme about Darwin in the film, and that's why it's called American Animals, this idea of, that we've kind of evolved beyond the point of being able to survive in the kind of Darwinian sense, right? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like we're now sort of just consumers, right?
Right.
We don't understand what it means to have to worry about, fear of, not eating, most of us, and particularly, these guys in this community.
Right.
So definitely there's something about this thought that, are you familiar with the hierarchy of needs, Maslow and all that stuff?
Oh, no, I'm not.
Okay, if you Google it, there's like a triangle, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's like, these are the things you worry about. First, I guess it's food, then it's shelter, all of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, your question about entitlement, why it's interesting, is because, with entitlement and privilege comes choice and, opportunity, massive amounts of opportunity. The problem is that with these guys, they then begin to worry about other things, which is this sort of existential need to be special, to be interesting, to be important. And because of that, that entitlement, that idea that, you are entitled to be special, you are entitled to lead a really interesting life, to be a person of value, of interest, And now, we live in this culture where all of that can kind of be measured. The fact that I can, that you have more Twitter followers than me. Does that mean you're more interesting or more important? Or, you know what I mean?
Right.
So these were the ideas that I was really interested in. That felt like they were partly motivations for these privileged, entitled young men doing this crime because, they'd been brought up with this expectation that they were going to amount to something great. And, that slow dawning reality that most of us experience or whatever, we might not be, remarkable. We might not be different. We might not leave a mark on the world.
Right.
So I think it's that idea that I felt is worth talking about, and it's important. I mean, in today's conversation, one could argue, well, why the fuck would you make a film about, privileged white guys? But, it's part of the same conversation, because these privileged white guys, they're not thinking about how to kind of make the world a more balanced, equal place. They're thinking, how am I going to be famous? Am I going to be more successful than my dad? All this kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
I don't know whether that's interesting or...
Yeah, no, that's what I was looking for sure. At one point in this movie, the characters go to Blockbuster and rent a bunch of heist films. Is that something that happened in real life? Because a lot of heist movies don't end well. You would think that they would be sort of put off of the idea after watching all of those.
Yeah, it's a great observation. I think... Sorry, that was a tram going past in San Francisco. I'm completely lost, by the way. Just walking through God knows where. So yeah, I mean yes, it did absolutely really happen. They didn't really know where to start. So and if you're not a kind of professional criminal, you look at all of the heist movies that have ever been made and try and get inspiration. There is even a line, I don't know whether you remember, there's a line in the film where Spencer says to Warren, didn't they all die in the end of that movie? Mm-hmm. Which is sort of supposed to be a kind of slightly foreshadowing moment.
Right.
But, yes, you're absolutely right. If they'd been clever, they would have realised that. I mean, I think there is a line in the film as well where Barry says to Warren, Spencer says to Warren, the bad guys don't get to walk off into the sunset with the loot. And he's like, well, how would we be the bad guys? And, Spencer's like, well, we'd be the robbers, Warren, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, they just didn't, in their mind, that wasn't how it was, in their minds, it was a victimless crime.
Yeah.
And I also, I don't know what you felt, but I don't think they ever really imagined they were going to go through with it.
Right, yeah. I definitely got that sense.
I think they fell in love with the fantasy, and they wanted to live in it. I mean, one of them described it to me in a letter from prison. I think it was Eric who said, for us it was like our version of Fight Club.
Yeah.
The secret that we had that set us apart from everyone else. So
yeah,
I think that's really true.
The movie features a long continuous shot that I really loved. It makes the heist look like the easiest thing in the world. Can you tell me about the origins and the execution of that shot? Yeah,
sure. So originally, I had planned to shoot that instead of one take, in 150 different shots. It was going to be like a drum solo. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was going to be like a kind of super percussive, kind of incredibly fast-moving, whiz-bang kind of, you know what I mean? Like loads of different cuts, and this incredibly slick sequence. And then when we got around to the schedule, and the first AD said to me, at best I can give you 3 hours for that sequence. And I was like, what? I mean, it would have, to shoot it the way I had originally imagined and sort of storyboarded, was going to take at least a day or two.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, well, maybe the way to do this is do it just in one shot. So all of the choreography becomes the split movement of it becomes the magic of that shot, that it's this very balletic thing. And because I didn't really have much help, we just basically, instead of shooting it for that whole 3 hours, what we did was we rehearsed it for 2.5 hours and shot it for half an hour. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We just rehearsed it, and I was blocking it out, and I was kind of doing all the movements, and it was a really great feeling because everyone was contributing. The actors, me, and Dowd, BJ, all of the people, and then I was looking at it and I was like, it's kind of fun, but it doesn't look great. So then I was like, okay, let's put the camera up and make the camera kind of almost dance around as well, so it's constantly moving. And we had this great Steadicam guy called John Layton, and so once that came and you started looking at the whole sequence through the monitor, it was like, oh yeah, this is really going to work and it's going to be great. And so, but the problem is if you do a long one shot like that where you've got 4 different people and they all have to hit like a perfect beat, something always goes wrong, and so we shot it, like, I think it was on the 16th take, we got it, and then everyone in the whole place erupted in this huge cheer, so that was very satisfying.
Things in this movie are largely pretty fun and breezy for a while, but without giving too much away, the movie definitely takes a turn that's pretty gut-wrenching. Can you talk about navigating the tonal shift there?
Yes, I mean, that was always something that was very, very, I guess, rigidly written into the script. The idea was that the sort of grammar and tone of the film would reflect the kind of protagonist's descent into the movie fantasy, that they become progressively more detached from reality than we do as well. So you'll notice in the film that all of those kind of non-fiction elements disappear, that it becomes more like that single shot you mentioned, it's more Ocean's 11 than it is Dog Day Afternoon,
right,
what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then there was this very clear point where I wanted when they cross the line and the reality crashes into the kind of fantasy in this head-on collision, that we pull the rug out from not just the characters but also the audience to a certain extent, and we are suddenly thrust into a much more difficult to watch, much more kind of visceral, documentary-like, it's much more raw and real and violent. And that idea was that, you as an audience are suddenly reminded that, oh shit, I was kind of going along with this, I was rooting for them as well, because I also needed them to do this ridiculously ill-advised thing, because I also want to know what happens on the other side of that line.
Right.
And then when you cross it, you realize you can't really cross back.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Should I let you go? I'm not sure if I have time for another question or not, or are you...
Go for it. I've got to get off in 1 minute, but I think I was late calling you, so go ahead.
Okay. I noticed that one of the things that the movie touches on is the sort of fluid nature of memory, and as a filmmaker coming from a documentary background, I imagine that's something that you've grappled with a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's a constant source of fascination, and somewhat, and slight, concern, I guess, in that, like, how unreliable memory can be, that it's not that, we trust that the things that we remember are versions of things that have actually happened to us. But the truth is, it's not like an instant replay of what actually, it's a very subjective thing, and it's filled with all of your emotions and all the things that you want it to be. And that, that was a very big factor of the imposter, this idea of, creating the truths that, or believing the truths that suit us rather than the truths that maybe are truest, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think with this, what I wanted to do with this movie was to sort of say to the audience, like, we all understand how this works, right? We're all very familiar with the game of fictionalizing true stories. We most, I don't know what percentage of films these days start with that caption card, this is based on a true story, and then you watch, Natalie Portman play Jackie Kennedy or whatever it is, and but you go along with it. And I wanted to say to the audience, look, let's be really open about this whole thing, about what is true and what is not, and what is fiction and what is, sort of a kind of version of the truth that we can't ever, know 100% is true. And so that when you're faced with two conflicting versions of the same thing, as a dramatist, you either choose one and go and kind of say, well, I prefer this version because it's more cinematic. Or what I ended up choosing to do was to kind of basically dramatize both versions and explore the fact that that it's hard to be 100% on what the truth of that situation is when two people remember it differently. So that's where that idea of dramatizing one conversation across two locations came from.
Yeah, well, I think it turned out really well.
Long-winded answers.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think it came across really well in the movie. Congratulations on the film, and thanks so much for speaking with me. I appreciate your time.
Oh, no, likewise, man. Take care, man.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you all enjoyed that. Again, you can read my full review of the film at slashfilm.com, and I will link to it in the show notes. My name is Ben, and you can find me on Twitter at BenPairs. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to Slash Film Daily on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, and Spotify, and email us feedback, questions, or any suggestions you have to peter@slashfilm.com. Be sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. And if you can, do us a favor and take 2 minutes to rate and review the podcast on iTunes, because that really helps us out in terms of visibility. Tell your friends about the show, spread the word however you can, and we'll talk to you next time.